When I was a parent, we would sit the kids down for dinner and give us the wrap of your day as 3 sweets and 1 sour. And the big news about this one is kind of 3 sours and 1 sweet. Lonnie Golden, professor of labor and human resources, Penn State Abington. So we'll start with the sweet, which is that the unemployment rate is not escalating. It's a little bit elevated from what it was a couple of years ago, but the unemployment rate is still relatively low by historic standards, close to 4%. One of the sours, however, is that the overall level of employment creation is actually down, and the last 2 months have been adjusted downward. So employment is really stagnant right now. The other sour that's connected to that is that if you can put the equation together, how could unemployment not go up, but the employment level is sagging? Or put differently, why is the employment level actually going down, but unemployment not going up? It's that people aren't participating in the labor force. So that is still stagnant below historical levels of how many people that are eligible to work that are not working. Our employment to population ratio and our labor force participation rate remain at historic lows. The other sour is that while part-time for economic reasons, as it's called, the people who are looking for full-time work but settle for part-time work, that seems to be elevated. As it remains elevated from what it was last year, and the composition of that is changing. So it seems that a lot of people that are looking for work are either finding work, dropping out of the labor force, or settling for part-time jobs when they prefer full-time. The hospitality and retail, which have been driving some of the labor market employment growth over the last few months, that actually sagged a bit in the last month. And healthcare is still growing, but not by enough to offset the losses in these other sectors. It's tricky from the numbers to know how people are feeling because you can have different feelings about the same numbers. But I think it's fair to say that one of the ongoing trends that has not yet reversed is that issue of affordability has 2 sides, right? So prices are escalating by 3-point-something%, and our average hourly and average earnings generally are rising by about 3%. So they're still lagging behind a little bit. There's some catching up to the inflation, but it's not overcoming the inflation of prices. So the average person, the average worker, is having trouble keeping up with price increases because their wages and salaries are not keeping up. If one is fortunate enough to have investments and assets and property, those have been escalating. So maybe you can keep up with what's called the wealth effect. So you can feel more wealthy if our stock portfolios are increasing. But if you're relying mostly or solely on your labor, that's a bit of a downer. There seems to be an inching up of people that are holding multiple jobs. And that's an indication of 2 things. 1, that they need more income than they're getting from their primary job. And 2, that the gig economy is providing opportunities for that. But it's hard to know how people feel about that if they'd rather be holding 1 primary job that pays well rather than 2 jobs where you have to supplement your income with the second job. I think it's fair to say that wages are rising a little bit above 3% and prices are rising at an average rate well above 3%. So wages are still lagging a bit behind inflation, and that's a trend that's been continuing for like the last year or 2. When the economy and its labor market was a little hotter, like in 2022, in the labor shortage environments, that has problems for employers, but it turns up as to attract and retain workers as offering higher wages and salaries. And now that's not necessarily the case. They're not holding them back, the wages and salaries, but they're not keeping up with the overall inflation rate. One of the trends I follow is this multiple job holding, and I think that that escalated last year, went back down, and now it seems to be escalating again. So I think that's a reflection of the underlying strengths and weaknesses of the economy. There are jobs available, but people are taking out second jobs because their earnings are not keeping up with inflation, or they took a part-time job as their main job and now want to periodically work in gig work to make ends meet.